Welcome to Inner Whispers. This is episode 21. My name is Alan. I'm the host of the show. And for those of you new to the show, it features April Crawford, who is a full-body open deep trance channel and a best-selling author. Check out Amazon.com. And Veronica, who is our name, actually, for a Causal Plane Entity, who at the beginning refused to give us a name because she didn't care for labels. But now everybody knows her as Veronica. And so the format will be April will say a few words, and we'll talk to Veronica. There's questions on the podcast link, and then maybe some other subjects will come up as well. And then at the end, Veronica's message to the world. And I'll just mention, if you want to learn more about readings or how you can talk directly to Veronica, just go to either Amazon.com and search April Crawford, or AprilCrawford.com has the information. April.
Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. This is our first show, and I still have my allotted 10 minutes or so to talk to you every week, which I'm still thrilled about. I wanted to talk today about how important it is to have support, especially if you're an aspiring channel. It's important to have people around you when you're endeavoring to practice. Now, I realize a lot of you say, well, there's really nobody around me who's even remotely or mildly interested. But sometimes friends will step up to the group gathering because, let's face it, when you've got a bunch of spiritual people together, there's always lots of unconditional love, and it's a supportive group that does understand each other in that regard. And I can tell you that in the channeling group, I ended up being the one does channeling as her life's work, and the other ones, some of them fell by the wayside, some of them were not sure quite what happened to them, but it was a period of time that was very important and special, and I ended up being married to Alan and in that whole endeavor. So it's a good idea, even if you have friends that aren't all that interested, that just plain love you, have a group session. Have a place where you can be safe and practice your channeling without the fear of anybody judging you or having an opinion about it. I think it would be a good idea for you to look for something like that in the new year. Now, when we were doing this was back in the late 80s, so there was no internet, there was no, any sort of computer community that all of you have now. And I think that it's probably more available than you think, because you could be Skyping with somebody who's in, Greenland, and another person could be in Russia, and you could be sitting there in St. Louis, Missouri, all participating in a channeling session as a group, even though you're thousands of miles apart. So I say for your New Year's resolution, if you're deeply interested in becoming a full-body trance channel or just, a relay channel, it's important to practice. It's important to submerge yourself in it. And if you have the support of friends or even acquaintances, it's a much better journey than trying to do it all by yourself. I say make that a priority early in the year. Start thinking about how you might want to do that and get started.
Thank you, April. And I'm going to hand this phone to Veronica with a question as soon as Veronica gets here. She's opening her eyes. And by the way, just to set the scene, I have two cats on me now in a dog environment where one of those little dogs could flip at any time, so don't freak out. This question is from Organic, and she wants to know what Veronica thinks about, or what she might comment on Seth's 9 families of consciousness and how they may relate to Michael's 7 families of consciousness, or what he calls essences.
Good day. It is Veronica. We always like to introduce ourselves at the beginning. It is a good question. Seth did have the 9 different types, and Michael came up with 7. We say that Seth did this because he wanted everyone to know that there are different kinds of energy and how they relate. But his listings we don't think were as extensive as Michael's were, nor was there a system put in place to really help you identify. But indeed valid, but not a lot of time spent on it. Where the Michael books, the ones that the Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough wrote, because she was part of the group, is very extensive. And if you read the books, it sort of gives you a feeling of being in a session with them. A lot of the writings of the Michael books were like sessions. They were transcripts of sessions. And we think that that would probably be a little bit more educational and easier to follow than the Seth material. Because sometimes Seth can be very heady and intellectual. And we think the Michael ones span across the intellectual but also into the emotional as well.
So here is another question from the comments. And it is, this is a question from Catherine, and from my experience, it relates mostly to people who are into astral projection or out-of-body experiences. And the question is, can you explain more about the quote-unquote silver cord?
Well, it is a perceived concept of your anchoring in the human form. Many say that who have done out-of-body experiences or maybe have had a moment where they almost crossed over and felt themselves being pulled back by what they perceived as a silver cord. It's not really a cord, so to speak. It's more of an energy, and it's your electromagnetic current and how it's anchored into the body. When you cross out of the body, it's usually severed, and if it becomes severed, even in an out-of-body experience, it could be problematic to get back into the form, but normally does not let go unless there is full agreement that you're wishing to cross out of the body.
Thank you, Veronica. This next one is from Sylvia. She's got two questions. Can human beings be possessed, quote-unquote, by evil, quote-unquote? You said outside evil does not exist, which I believe.
Evil is a separation from the divine. It is often a choice within the singular human being who has a soul. They separate from their divine source and start to participate in linear concepts and events that are completely opposite of what the true meaning of life is. It is only really a human or a being that's separated from its source that can create evil. We've had many say, well, there's all these outside forces, and we say, well, no, not necessarily. It's the ability not to connect with your divine that causes the, quote, evil moment to happen, because you start making choices and decisions based upon completely linear ego-based stuff, and it can escalate and get out of control and thus become extremely negative and evil.
Thank you, Veronica. And her next related question is, what about exorcisms? Are they fake? And I'll just throw in advance. It seems to me that exorcisms only take place with one specific religion in the world right now. But she wants to know, are exorcisms real or are they fake?
Well, we don't think it's quite all that black and white. We'd say that if you are in a certain religious persuasion and you are faced with all the dogma that is generated from that particular religious group, there have been lots of stories about possession, about evil spirits, making you do things or guiding you to do things that are completely out of line and out of character with who you are as a soul. They're not something that should be played with, exorcisms. We think what it does is it conjures up the negativity in the person, and it tends to turn into sort of a circus kind of environment. And you do live in a culture that really likes to scare itself. So scary stories about exorcisms and evil things tend to pique the interest of some of those who are participating in the reality. So we'd say that an exorcism is not the removal of an outside energy. It's more of a going inward to what's really creating the negativity in you and trying to bring that out of you.
Thank you, Veronica. And then Sylvia's final question is, could you also elaborate on the Ouija board?
Well, first of all, we'd like to say that the Ouija board is not a toy. It is often marketed as a toy for young children who are having, we'll say, pajama parties to scary individuals. There are a lot of lower astrals that when two people focus their energy, as a Ouija board offers, that could come in and be a little bit mischievous with those who are participating, which is why we say it should not be used as a toy, especially by young children, because young children don't really have the filters to keep out the lower astrals that might come in. We'd say that it's a useful tool for those who are seeking to connect to spirit or seeking to have some counsel by a guide but simply can't get the words or the verbiage from it. And you can get this way, you can get the lettering and get the message so that it is a helpful tool to those who are seeking guidance. But again, we want to emphasize it is not a toy, because there are lower astrals that can sort of sneak in there. And what you really want is the highest quality of energy to come through. And when there's two people of high quality with high expectations, elevated sense of spirit, then you can get some really interesting conversations with those who are perhaps in the astral state or even in a higher state to give you some good information. But it needs to be done with integrity, and it needs to be done with two individuals who are focused.
See what else we got on this thing. Here's a interesting question from Stephanie, and she says that, Veronica, you often talk about staying in the present moment and letting go of the past, but what about people with PTSD who literally, I don't know if that's true, cannot let go of the past because of the traumatic things they've experienced, that have literally, again, I don't know if that's true, wired their brains in a way that causes the past to reach out and harm them or you? But here's a good question. How can someone with PTSD deal with this trauma and start to move past it? And, of course, I would add my comment, other than becoming more spiritually aware. But let's see what Veronica says.
Well, unfortunately, in the linear environment, there are often episodes of trauma that occur that each time someone experiences the energy of that dramatic event, they're thrown back into that dramatic event. Now, we realize that this is a problem, and it is often very difficult for someone to stay present when there is an event that triggers them to fall back into the trauma that they had. Now, the most common one is someone who was at war, where they've experienced death, where they've experienced loud noises that precipitated death, and every time they hear, for the rest of their life, a loud boom or a bang or something that sounds like a gun going off or a bomb going off, they're triggered right back into the linear reality that caused them to have the PTSD to begin with. Now, we realize there are varying degrees of this, but we picked that one because it's the most vivid. We'd say that becoming really comfortable with your communication with your soul is a good way to help create an atmosphere where PTSD isn't as strong. Now, we realize there's all kinds of psychological help and therapies available, which we would say all those who have PTSD should participate in. But it's also really important to start connecting soulfully, to start stepping out of the linear a little bit and have it in a more eternal perspective, because you've had a mountain of experience in the linear, not just from this particular life. So if the more you attach to your eternal self, the broader your spectrum is, and perhaps less loud and traumatic are the PTSD triggers that propel you in this current linear. We would highly suggest, besides therapy, to participate in meditation groups, Tai Chi, looking for that space in your consciousness that is eternal, that understands all experience is valid, and there are some that are more distinctive than others. But becoming more spiritually aware is true, Alan Crawford, and becoming very connected to yourself in an eternal sense, not just a linear sense or the immediate linear. And all of you need to understand that you've had many linears. Most have had many, many, many linears. And choosing to focus just on one, which we realize is difficult, may not be the best way to help yourself. So we'd say develop a broader perspective, develop that sense of expansiveness, and become really best friends with your soul. That could be extremely helpful as well.
Thank you, Veronica. All right, this next question is from, who's this from? Oh, Karen. And it's a question that could be not only a college curriculum for a semester, but the entire college curriculum for 4 years, doctorate, postdoctorate, and for your entire lifetime. So I'm not sure that this kind of forum is a good idea to discuss it, but since the question was asked, maybe we can just touch on it. And by the way, we've already touched on this, so I'm answering this because maybe some people haven't listened to the earlier episodes where we discussed some of this. And this is from Karen. She says, my question is about source. Is there just one source or many? Now, I'll also notice that there's a semantic thing here, because source is not the same thing as source entities. So that's the first question. My question is about source. Is there just one source or many? But the following is, could Veronica please elaborate on source and source entities?
Well, this is a topic that we could probably talk about for the next 3 or 4 hours at minimum. But we will tell you this. Yes, there's more than one source. There are many different sources from which energy comes. And that's just on this particular solar system and quadrant that you're in. There are many other quadrants of life that have source that are unrelated to where you're at now. So it is a very complex question that obviously cannot be completely answered in a forum such as this. And you're right, it might be a whole lifetime of study to begin to scratch the surface on what it truly means. We think all of you, especially on this particular planet, there's a lot of monotheism, but there isn't just one. There's more than one. And we think that that's probably enough to think about for now in this particular form. And also, there are different entities attached to each of those sources. So it's a complex question. We're giving it a very simplistic answer. And maybe we'll continue a little bit every week to talk about it.
Thank you, Veronica. Okay, so this is the part of the program where I ask Veronica to talk about whatever she wants to, but it's her message to the world and to you in this new year.
Well, we realize that this is what you call a new year. It is called January, and it signifies the start, a fresh start, as you go through another secular moment in the solar system. We would say, why not this year, besides a New Year's resolution, why not decide to be more adventuresome? Why not decide that out of all the choices you make every day, let's say you make 10 major choices every day, why not change 2 of them to something different? Change the choice. Change how you look at the choice. Change how you feel about the choice. And remember when we talked about being the pebble and throwing it into the pond and the ripple effect? This is sort of an internal ripple effect where you decide to maybe step out of your natural patterns that you've created over the last year and look at them thoroughly and say, does really all these patterns that I've created, do they serve me? Or are some of them outmoded? Or are some of them simply not working? Why not consider looking at all the past year that you just had and decide to make some changes in how you do your choice making? See how it works. It is rather like the pebble in the pond, but this time it's internal. You're not doing it to create an atmosphere outside of yourself. You're doing it to create a new atmosphere within yourself. And sometimes that's the best way you can take care of the pebble that is you.
Thank you, Veronica. And as I like to say, that concludes the interesting part of the broadcast and podcast.